Mansour is on his way here because he was just running a presentation at Royal Holloway, so he should be here any minute. And Dr. Greg Frakos, chapter coordinator, is here as well. We're very friendly guys. Come and talk to us about any issues regarding application security or OWASP. We're on Twitter as well, our main Twitter, OWASP London. If you're going to tweet about the event, please use hashtag OWASP London. So who is OWASP? We are a charity, first of all. We're a global non-profit organization, and we are focused on improving security of software. So what do? We collaboratively develop and provide free tools, guidance, standards, and meetups. So all our meetings are free to attend, and free beer and food is included. We are all volunteers. There are 45,000 volunteers worldwide. We're a non-profit. There is an OWASP chapter almost in every single country in the world. We operate via chapters. In the UK, there are quite a few of those. Some of them were shut down and being reopened, which is good. For example, OWASP Birmingham will be reopened soon and relaunched. OWASP Bristol just had their meeting recently, and OWASP Cambridge as well. Actually, Dr. Frakos presented at Cambridge, I think just a week ago, right? 2 weeks ago. Which is great. So this is the agenda for tonight. So obviously, as always, first of all, we're having our bit of networking, food and drinks. So yeah, it's good that we have our name badges, makes networking a little bit easier, right? And then we'll update you on our news events and conferences. Then Stefania is going to talk to us about what happened with Equifax and why we're potentially suffering from the same issues. Then we're going to have a bit of a break. During the break, enjoy more beer, drinks, grab some freebies from our sponsors. They're on the table with the OWASP tablecloth. And then Dr. Alexis Milonas is going to talk to us about interesting tracking mechanisms beyond cookies. And then the most important part of the evening usually happens in the pub afterwards, where we continue networking, and we're going to go to a pub called Singer Tavern, which is literally 5 minutes walk away from here. It's a very large pub, but it can get quite noisy, so yeah, it's a bit cold, but hopefully it will be all right. So we run not just chapter events, these meetings for everyone. We also run hackathons and capture the flag. We are in the process of agreeing with a venue, another Capture the Flag event soon. Also, we're going to be running some pub quizzes with the hacking themes, organize workshops. And another thing we started doing is talking to university students. And I want to hand over to Dr. Greg Frakos about academia. Yes. And how we want to get involved with academia.
So, welcome from myself. We are looking into talking and spreading the word in different universities around the UK. So if you're involved or you know anyone who would like to invite us to come and give a talk to the students from an OWASP perspective, to engage with them, to tell them why they should be looking into the projects, how these projects are being used in everyday jobs in security, how they can contribute not only by writing code, but actually contribute in the projects in so many different ways. So we are doing talks in different universities. I'm going to be doing one in Hertfordshire next week. Probably like 80% I'm going to be doing 2 next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. It depends. I'm still.
Is that the University of Cardiff?
Yeah, Cardiff and South Wales. But we haven't confirmed it yet. Well, you've shared the secret now.
Yeah. And obviously there's one at the Royal Holloway, University of London, yes. And that's where our third chapter leader, Sharif, was earlier today, and he's on his way back here.
Yeah, so we're trying to engage with the community a little bit further. We're trying to engage people to come and meet us, come and talk to us. If you have project ideas, why not share it? Why not engage people who would like to contribute? So, yeah, I mean, we might do something in the near future.
Yeah, excellent. Right, so for those of you who are here for the first time, if you want to make sure you don't miss the next event, the best way of keeping in touch is sign up to our mailing list, which is an old-fashioned way, but it works. You get an email. We promise not to spam you. We only send like 1 email a month, tops. Follow us on Twitter. Like us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. If you're a developer using Slack, we have an OWASP channel, so just join us on Slack. We're also on LinkedIn. You can follow OWASP London chapter on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. All our meetups are recorded, and they will be available on our YouTube channel. We're also on Meetup. OWASP-London is our Meetup page. And of course, we have an official webpage on owasp.org. Okay, so if you would like to ask some questions during the event and you've got a question, I think it's best to use something called Slido, which is a free app. It's actually not even an app. You can just navigate to it in your smartphone, type your question, and then we will ask the presenters straight afterwards, because it makes our job a bit easier because we're going to run with microphones and ask questions from the audience, but also if you ask beforehand, that would be great. Membership. So OWASP is a membership organization, but you don't have to be a member to come to our events or to contribute or participate in any of our projects. However, because we're a charity, of course, it's a good idea to become a member and donate. It's only $50 a year for an individual. You can just go to owasp.org and click on membership and join. And what do you get? First of all, you support our ethics and principles of OWASP. You will underscore your awareness of application security within your organization and get a chance to increase your value and knowledge, expand your skills, network with like-minded professionals all over the world, and collaborate on projects. And another very good benefit is you get exclusive discounts on OWASP AppSec Europe, AppSec USA, and we're going to have AppSec APAC as well, and many other global cybersecurity conferences and events. For example, Black Hat Europe is happening very soon, in 2 weeks' time, and basically there's a discount for that one, and I think almost every single major cybersecurity conference we're getting a discount.
So basically, you don't have to pay for your membership. You don't really have to, but if you do, you get an email address that is part of the OWASP.org. That's okay. That's a simple thing, but the big differentiator here is that we give you the opportunity to go to different security conferences and get a very good discount. So you're getting your money back like that, basically.
And of course, another very important thing, why to become a member, you get to vote on issues to shape direction of OWASP community, right? So you get a vote for $50 a year. Another benefit you get if you become a member, you get a sticker, right? Well, like stickers for laptops. So yeah, any members can, I just given one out earlier today, so to Jeremy Lawrence. So.
And one of the things that you can do with memberships, you don't just give the money to OWASP. You can actually select which chapter you want the money to go to.
Or a project,
or
if you like OWASP
Or a
Zap.
project, like if you like OWASP Zap and you're using it and you want to support the development, or any other project that is maybe not so familiar or people aren't so familiar or so popular, you can donate the money there so we can help people, focus and develop it further.
Okay, so on the voting issue, we actually have a new board. We had an election recently, and we actually have 3 new board members. We have Martin Knobloch, who is a chapter leader of OWASP Netherlands. We have Richard Greenberg, elected, who is the chapter leader of OWASP Los Angeles, and Gary Robinson, who is one of the OWASP Belfast chapter leaders. And actually, we have one other OWASP Belfast chapter leader, Siobhan. She's in the audience today. Hey, hi, Siobhan. Excellent. Siobhan Galka is another OWASP Belfast chapter leader. So congratulations to all the new board members. So they will be doing the 2-year sentence and service to the community. Another little bit of sad board news. So, we had the executive director, Karen Staley, join us a year ago. Unfortunately, she will be leaving the position of executive director soon. So we'd like to thank Karen for all her efforts and contribution, because I think she managed to achieve quite a lot over the past year. And we had a very successful AppSec Europe and AppSec USA conferences. I think she actually managed to do 2 AppSec USA conferences. And we wish her all the best in a new role. There will be an interim executive director in place while for the transition period. And another board news, Sharif Mansour is our co-leader and is also on the board of OWASP. He will replace Andrew van der Stok as the new treasurer of OWASP Global Foundation. Of course, we are non-profit and we are vendor-neutral organization, but we are supported by vendors. So you can see a lot of companies are our corporate sponsors. I think more or less you can see quite a lot of cybersecurity companies, big names, big brands are supporting OWASP and donating to us and our projects.
So if you are working for a company and you would like to host one of these events, just come and find us, let us know, and we can organize something like that in your organization.
Okay, so there are also some premium members as well. So these companies donate to OWASP $20,000 a year. So, and we have some new ones as well, which recently joined. So please do it at HackerOne and Facebook. We're new corporate members of OWASP this year, which is absolutely great. So thank you very much to our sponsors. So locally in London, we also have chapter sponsors here, as are all the people who host our events and donate to us. These are all the companies, as you can see on the screen. And so last time, those of you who attended our event at JP Morgan and Facebook in October and September, I think you guys enjoy these events. So we're back at Microsoft. And because we are back at Microsoft, I hope you're going to enjoy this great venue. which Microsoft built for us. But it comes with a little bit of disclaimer, which I need to show you, because we have health and safety issue, right? So there you go, we are here. So there are no fire alarms scheduled for tonight, so if there's any fire alarm, leave the building as quickly as possible. As usually, you know, the fire exit's there. If you need the toilets, they're just by the door, by the entrance door. And this place is the assembly point, right? So you can see we're here, this building here, and there's a little bit up the street, the assembly location. Yeah, and of course we have people from Microsoft supporting us tonight, so any incidents of first aid required, just speak to lovely Microsoft staff. Okay, so let me get back to OWASP now. Okay. No. I have to switch between the presentations, right? Okay, and back here. Okay, so update on AppSec EU, great conference we had in July. All the videos are now online. We had 77 speakers presenting absolutely amazing talks about application security, cyber security, security of blockchain and cyber currencies, cryptocurrencies, cross-site scripting, new attacks on AWS and cloud, lots of interesting topics. So please check out these videos.
There were a few talks on machine learning, but actually the research, like the real talks on machine learning, not like, you know, selling stuff, machine learning. So that was really, really good.
Okay, an announcement for all the ladies. So we have our own initiative, which is called OWASP Women in Application Security. It's OWASP WIA, so you can find them on Twitter. And I'm happy to report that we have now a local person. So Lauren is going to be running Women in AppSec. Hey, Lauren. Yeah, so any ladies, if you want to have your own meetups, and see, there's already OWASP WIA is already running YouTube channel. Vandana, Zoe, and Tanya Jenka from OWASP Ottawa, they're running this training and workshops for ladies, which is absolutely great. And I think we have another initiative for women called Ladies of London Hacking Society. I think this would be great. There you go. Hey, Lauren. So if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, I've just been pulled up to say something. So yeah, I'm excited to launch, I guess, the Women in AppSec in London. But of course, it's not just open to women, it's open to men. So totally complement this OWASP chapter. And yeah, looking forward to getting started in the new year.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Lauren. And to continue on the fact of diversity, I think we've done really well because this year we actually had 4 female speakers at OWASP London. So those of you who regularly attend our events, we had Leanne Galloway talking about hacking cash machines later this year. We had Anthony Gilligan talking about becoming a security champion. We had Zoe Rose last month talking about issues with designing things without security in mind and all the consequences that it brings with it. And obviously we have Stefania from Sonatype talking about all the issues with open source security. So these are all awesome ladies. I specifically put a slide with their faces and their Twitter handles. So if you're on Twitter, please do follow these awesome ladies because they're absolutely great. Okay, few updates on the project. So Defect Dojo, again, if you don't use it, please do, because that absolutely free and open source project will help you manage vulnerabilities, import vulnerability results from various pen testing tools, and integrate and orchestrate them all in one nice dashboard, absolutely free. Dependency check, another free project that we have is actually now being upgraded from a lab project to a flagship project. Is now doing really well. So I think it's very topical for Stefania's talk. So if you're not using it, please make sure that you download it and check it out. I'm pretty sure you probably want to do it after Stefania's talk. Upcoming events, so we have OWASP Benelux Day happening next week and OWASP Norway Day as well. And promotional events, Black Hat London is happening December 3rd till 6th. So 3rd and 4th are training days. But 5th and 6th are the actual conference days. So as you know, Black Hat is world's largest hacker conference. And we're going to be there. We're going to be there as a community sponsor. So Greg and I going to be manning the booth for
Yes,
OWASP.
you're gonna be fine. You're gonna find us there. So if you're coming, come and say hi. Or if any of your friends come over, just tell us to come and find us.
Okay, so we are always looking for speakers. So if you'd like to present a talk on the subject of cybersecurity, of application security, please talk to us. We usually welcome talks in 3 tracks: breakers, defenders, and builders. So breakers, if you broke something and you have to hack into things, please come and share that knowledge. If you are a defender and you want to tell us about some techniques, how to protect the organization from cyber attacks, yeah, please present your talk here. And if you're a developer and you build a nice cybersecurity related tool, for example, recently we had a very good OWASP AMAS tool, which is a DNS reconnaissance tool. Please come and talk to us to present. You can just email your talk proposal to owaspLondon@owasp.org. Very simple email address. Right, so now we're getting ready to the first talk. I'm just reminding you, you can ask questions using slide.do. Gonna do a swap over of laptops. Right, Stefania, and I'll introduce Stefania. Stefania comes from Sonatype, so she's a software engineer originally by training, and I think Python developer.
Yeah.
You're originally, right? Stefania presented her talks at quite a few international conferences, of course, all talking about open source security. The new DevSecOps movement, as you know, right? Sonatype supports it very, very well. And I think, Steph, to highlight this, chosen a Twitter handle, DevSecOps. Very easy to remember. There you go, Stefania, all yours now.
Cool, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, cool. So just to point out as well, I actually have an OWASP WEA sticker. So if anyone wants one, they're amazing, so you should get one. Does this pointer work? No, that's fine. We are all Equifax, the data behind DevSecOps. So I'm Stefania Chaplin, Solutions Engineer at Sonatype. You can find me on Twitter, DevStefOps, because I say you can't have DevOps without Steph. And feel free to take photos and tweet me. I'll retweet, I'll follow. I'm new to this whole Twitter thing. So who am I? So I went to Manchester Uni, where I mainly did Java. And then I worked at a startup in a tech company called Vacancy Soft, where I basically trained myself to do Python. And now I work at Sonatype, which specializes in open source cybersecurity. And the reason that I put this kind of little logo of the world is I always get calls from clients, and they're like, oh yeah, we're using Ansible and Kubernetes and Bamboo and Jenkins and repository, and it's like every other week there's a new buzzword, and I'm like, oh, okay, let me just do a quick Google and figure out what it is. So I'm basically covering the whole world, and I travel a lot as well. So back to my talk. Equifax. So who are Equifax? Equifax are a credit ratings agency. So if, for example, you're going to take out a loan or take out kind of a mortgage or anything like that, behind all the high street banks, Equifax are the ones storing your personal information. So name, addresses, occupational history, the kind of all the important stuff. And what happened to them around last March is they got hacked. So 145 million people in America. And if you think there's about 250, maybe 300 there, so obviously a large proportion. And this kind of information, it's not the kind of information that it's like, oh, it's fine, I'll just change my date of birth and my name and my occupation history. So one of the immediate effects of this actually was there was a sudden peak in fraud of people trying to take out loans because that's the key information. So what happened? March the 7th, Apache Struts, so they're a software house, they realized they had a vulnerability. And they're actually one of the good guys because they realize they have a problem, and then they do the remediation, the patch, on the same day. That's kind of obvious, but that is not what happens. Sometimes people realize there's a problem, but they don't actually fix it, or maybe they don't even realize there's a problem. Whilst with Apache, they find out and they do the patch, so great. So they do all they can do. What happened next? March the 9th, so 2 days later, Equifax applications were breached through a Struts 2 vulnerability. So that's, you got that's 2 days. Ironically, it was actually a who am I command. And you can think of these hackers, they're going around, they're finding struts like, who am I? User 72,000, user 300, admin or root, that's, suddenly dollar signs ringing up. So the issue with Equifax was they did not realize they had been hacked until July 29th. So obviously, that is quite a long period for the hackers to be having a good time. And what you found from about May until until July 29th, that was the large-scale exploit. Initially, there was just the probe, and then once they kind of understood the structure of what they're dealing with, then they started mining for all of these, for all this personal information. It wasn't just America. There were about, I think it's 500,000 to 1 million kind of European, but yeah, mainly America. And when you look at this graph between March the 7th, when there was the vulnerability, to July 29th, that little green patch just here, Equifax had 2 days between the between the vulnerability, until they got hacked. So how, especially with a large organization, how can you fix things? How can you do it manually? It's like, oh, okay, there's a new vulnerability with the framework. Okay, let's search every single application in the organization to see, are we using struts 2? Are we using struts 1? So manual processes, you can't do it in 2 days. So what happens at Equifax? They didn't actually announce until September. I think September the 9th. And what happened was, if it was under GDPR, they would have been fined, I think, $62.9 million. The CEO, CTO, CISO all took early retirement, and they lost 1/3, about $5 billion off their market capitalization. So yeah, kind of a big deal. And the issue is, with this strut, Equifax was not alone. So March the 7th, I've talked about what happened. March the 8th, NSA reveals Pentagon servers scanned by nation states for vulnerable struts instances. So the struts exploit was published. So one day after, there's a vulnerability, there's a hack immediately available on the internet. March the 9th, Cisco observes that there are a high number of exploits on the servers. March 10th, Equifax, Canada Revenue Agency, Canada Statistics, and the Japanese GMO Payment Gateway. That was 3 days in March. So what can you do if there's a vulnerability, and there are vulnerabilities coming out every day, if you don't know what you're using in your software, if you're using applications, and how can you remediate? Do you know which version you're using? So what happened next? The rest of the story. March 13th, another Japanese, it was the Japanese Power and Japan Post. April 13th, my birthday, India Post. December 17th, some of you may have heard the Monero crypto mining, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. March 2018, India's AADHAAR, which is, the thing about that, that's biometrics. So that's the biometric ID card. And the thing is, once you get your fingerprint hacked, you can't really replace your fingerprint. I was actually reading an interesting article recently about, you talk about master keys. They've actually generated master fingerprints, which there are about 10 different types, and then you can hack everyone's fingerprints, which is just really alarming. And then today, 8,780 companies continue to download the vulnerable version of Strut, which includes 57% of the Fortune 100. So, taking it back in time a bit, I'm going to talk about W. Edwards Deming, who wrote Out of the Crisis in 1982. So he was quite famous because he worked a lot with the Japanese, Japanese car industry, specifically Toyota, and he said, you cannot inspect quality into a product. You have to build it in from the beginning. Like, how about we use good quality parts? Or how about we standardize the inputs? Or all these things now, which is so obvious. Back then, it was revolutionary. And if you look at the difference between what Toyota were doing in the 80s versus what, not bad naming, but say, for example, Ford were doing, what you're finding is when you have good quality inputs, standardized, you know what parts are going into what product, you end up building quality, which is obviously a good thing. So, something we do at Sonotype, we do the state of the software supply chain. And we look at many languages. So yeah, check it out. It's a good read, loads of infographics. And we've been doing this for 4 years now. So, we can really spot some trends. But you ask, what is the software supply chain? So it's very similar to your manufacturing supply chain. So you have your suppliers. So they're your open source projects. So that, for example, is Apache, and what they're doing is they're creating these open source components that you can use, struts, Jackson Data Mine, Commons Collection, etc. And then what happens? So they're all being kind of created in the cloud. If you want to use them, you're going to store them. You're going to take them and put them in your warehouses. But obviously in software, those would be your component repositories where you can, cache your open source locally. Then you have your manufacturers, so that would be your software development teams. And what happens, and as I speak from experience because I was a developer, we love open source. It's awesome. So what you actually find is we are assembling kind of different pieces together. We're actually the manufacturers taking all the open source, because I used to do Python. I used to do a lot of web scraping, and I remember scraping a site and there were loads of PDFs, and was I going to figure out how to scrape a PDF when I'm used to HTML, or was I just going to Google scrape PDF Python? All of a sudden, Stack Overflow's given me some open source. Did I think what transitive dependencies were involved or licensing? Most of the time, but anyway, you end up, once your developers, your software development teams have assembled all these open source components, they put them in the software applications, which are, your finished goods, which is what you use and ship to market. So we've been, tracking, a number of languages for a long time. And what you can see here, in 2011, there were about 150 new open source projects a day. And we looked at NPM, Java, NuGet, PyPy. When you get to the end of the chart, 2017, it's nearly 1,100 new projects every single day. And also with that, a lot of companies out there, they like to do whitelist, blacklist, because, it sounds legit. But it's like, does that scale? If there are 1,100 new projects a day, how are you going to maintain that kind of list? And even within that, there's variance. So you've got 10,000 new versions every single day. And then about 14 releases a year. And this varies massively. You have some people, I think it's Netflix, they're releasing multiple times a day. And then you have other projects that are deprecated. You're on the most recent version, and it's 12 years old. So you're like, oh, wow, my software might be older than my children. If we look at Java, for example, so Sonatype, we own Maven Central, which you might know if you ever download Java. And what we've seen is 10 years of exponential growth. So 2008, there were 1 billion downloads a year. 2017, that's risen to 87 billion downloads a year. And if you look at, say, the number of developers, it's not like we had 1 million Java developers in 2008 and now we have 87 million. What this is showing is a change in behavior. So developers are using open source. It's quick, it's easy, it's innovative. You get features out faster. That's what we're trying to do. Faster, more releases, fail fast, etc. And this isn't just Java. This is JavaScript as well. So Laurie Voss, he's the CTO or COO. Anyway, he's kind of the head of NPM, which is the JavaScript repository. And this was back in April, and he said NPM users downloaded 5 billion packages in the last 7 days. On this day 4 years ago, that figure was 50 million. That's 10,000% growth. He published a similar chart. I saw it a few months ago, but I forgot to screenshot it. And that number's up to about 6.5 million now. So you can see the same kind of exponential growth because people are using open source because, it makes sense. I travel, I see big companies, little companies, tech, government, retail, automotive, etc. And across a variety of languages, 80 to 90% of modern applications consist of assembled components. So that little bit there, that's your original code. And this is, across all languages. And it's not just development. So these are numbers from Docker Hub. It's not quite to scale because you'll see here, this is 1 million and this is 1 billion, and that's not quite 1,000x. But anyway, 1 million, 1 billion, 6, and 12, and you can see the same rise as it's getting more popular. So we're seeing a similar thing in operations. So 80 to 90% of modern operations consist of assembled containers, and everyone's seen the rise of, AWS, Azure, Kubernetes. It just makes sense. However, not all parts are created equal. So We had a look at Java open source components, and we saw that there were 122,000 with known vulnerabilities. So we had a look at them and looked at the project, looked at any remediation plans, etc. And just under 20,000, so 15.8 and 1 in 6, had fixed the vulnerability. So you're like, well, good, you fixed it. But then you think, okay, so 5 and 6 haven't fixed it. And the issue is, even if they fixed it, which is obviously great, they took on average mean 233 days, median 119. So they're taking months, they're taking nearly a year to fix these problems. If you think about what happened to Equifax, you had 2 days. Which brings me, obviously, to Apache. So when they realized they had this vulnerability, like I said, they're the good guys. They fixed the vulnerability. They had 0 days mean time to remediation. So Apache are doing everything they can do. They're saying there's a problem and there's a patch at the same time. But obviously, there must be a disconnect somewhere if there's a patch, but it's not being implemented within production applications. So we had a look at 7,500 organizations. And on average, 170,000 Java components downloaded annually, which 3,500 were unique. So that brings a little bit of that's a little bit of version dispersion, but anyway. And of that, 18,000, 11.1% had known vulnerabilities. So what this means is there is a CVE associated with it. There's a vulnerability. There might even be a pre-baked Metasploit out there. And people are just downloading it. So it makes us think, OK, are 11.1% of developers secretly trying to hack their own company? Or are they not getting the information where they need it, in their IDE, in source control? Are they just not even aware of security? Why is this number so high? And the thing is, we spoke to a lot of companies. We surveyed companies as well. And 6 in 10 have open source policies. So people are aware they're using open source, it's important, and they need to obviously have some form of governance. However, it's not working. So as I said, we own Maven Central, so we can track trends. 2014, 6.2% of downloads were vulnerable. So I think, was that I want to say 1 in 16, but anyway. 2015 dropped a little bit. 2016, 5.5, 1 in 18. Yes, okay, progress. 2017, we actually reran the numbers because no one believed it. 12.1% of every single Java component that was downloaded had a known vulnerability. So that's 1 in 8. So if you think of the chart before when it said 87 billion downloads a year, that's like 11 billion downloads have known vulnerabilities. There's National Vulnerabilities Database. There's everything. So, why is that happening? I think, personally, a lot of the reason it's, one of the many reasons is transitive dependencies, because a lot of the time I speak from experience, but I would usually look at the top level dependence, the dependency I was declaring. Okay, did I go into the next level? Sometimes. Did I go 3 levels deep? Not always. If I had done that with every single open source component, it probably would have been quicker to write what I needed to do from scratch than to research 4 or 5 levels of transitive dependencies, which kind of defeats the case of open source. And like I said, this isn't just Java. So this is taken, Laurie Voss, so he was from the NPM screenshot before. He did a talk at NPM and the Future of JavaScript in October. And I don't know if there are any JavaScript developers. There's a tool out there, NPM Audit, which is great. It's in the terminal. It just gives you, a bit of information as you're developing. And he saw that there are 4 million scans a week. So obviously, people are interested. And of that, 51% had vulnerabilities, so just over half. 37% had high, and 11% had critical. And critical is normally like the 9s and the 10s. So obviously, that means easily exploitable. And then at university, they did a study looking at front ends of website. They looked at a couple of thousand. And they looked at, for popular frameworks. So handlebars, 87% of handlebars inclusions were vulnerable. jQuery, 37%. There are over 72,000 versions of jQuery. So how do you know which version you're using or if it's safe? And 40% of Angular inclusions were known vulnerable as well. And this is, these are sites on the internet. This is production. So it does make you think, OK, I really hope 87% of handlebars developers aren't intentionally, putting in RCs and cross-site scripting, for fun. But So what we saw, we had a look at kind of over the years. So Heartbleed, some of you may be familiar with. The ironic thing about that on a CBSS score, that was only a 5. So the scale goes from 1 to 10. And 5 is kind of in the middle. If you think about the criticals, those are the 9s and the 10s, and it's about ease of exploitability. And in 2014, as I said, we survey people. 14% have verified a breach related to open source components. 2017, that's risen to 20%. That's 1 in 5. That's like that portion of the room. And then suddenly, 2018, 31%, so almost 1 in 3, suspect or have verified a breach related to open source components. So if you look to your left and if you look to your right, one of you has probably suspected you've been hacked. So literally, Equifax was not alone. So, okay, this is a bit of a busy slide. I'm going to talk through it, so just ignore most of it. So number 1, this is looking at exploit over time. So left pad. This was kind of the first kind of big issue with open source, like over the recent years. It happened in March 2016. And what happened is there was a bit of an argument between a developer and NPM. It was kind of a, the boy and Goliath kind of thing. And the developer was like, okay, fine, I'm just going to delete everything from NPM. What happened, of course, was he deleted this little application code, I think it was like 12 lines called left pad. And all of a sudden, I think 70,000 builds around the world just failed. Because all that code did was it just moved a little bit of text to the left. And I think it was like Facebook got affected, Google, the big players. So it did spark some questions. Should people be allowed to delete from the public repository if everyone's using it? So that was March 2016. 2, 3, 4. So 2 and 3, 2, NPM credentials. So this, credentials is kind of an upcoming thing in this slide, but I'm just going to talk through it. So NPM credentials used by publishers of 79,000 packages were published online or easily compromised by dictionary attacks. And the issue with that is everyone's kind of using open source, especially within transitive. You're not necessarily checking it. So if you have your credentials hacked, you could secretly put in a few lines and start skimming credit card details. Similarly, typo squatting, that happens a lot. So number 3, NPM typo squat, there were 40 intentional malicious packages. There was actually, I don't think it's on, oh yeah, so this happened 2 weeks ago, it's not on this slide. There was an instance with Python and Colorama. They made it the English spelling, so the right one, but unfortunately they put in a remote code execution attack. Whoops. And then number 4, Docker 123321. So these were images with kind of intentional crypto mining. Number 5, typo squatting. The Slovakian government found out about 10 malicious PyPy packages with, that were downloaded and had loads of attacks with them. Number 6, this is actually quite an interesting one. So it was a fictitious tale on Medium. This guy called Gilbertson wrote about, oh yeah, so I'm secretly hacking all of your, I'm hacking all of you. And I think it was actually the most read article on Medium because it had a very good title. And it was very fictitious, but it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I've just made a package. It just changes font, and font is so much fun. It changes the colors. And then, even better, I've got other packages to use it. So I'm now a transitive dependency. So all of a sudden, I'm being downloaded, a couple of hundred times. Well, I'm in a few hundred packages, hundreds if not thousands of times. And all I've got is this little bit of code, and I'm sending back credit card information. And it's a really good article, because then it says the devil's advocate, oh no, but I have pen testers. You're going to be catching me. And the answer is, okay, we're pen testing between, what time do your pen testers work? I'm only operating between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Okay, I might not get all the traffic, but, are you going to catch me? And anyway, it's a really good article, because it literally, by the end of it, I was like, oh my God. And at the bottom it said, okay, this is totally fictitious, but it wouldn't necessarily be. And what you've seen is there have been recent attacks as well that have taken elements of that, because it is, when you stop and look, it is a little bit terrifying. So yeah, just the last few ones. Number 7, it was another NPM credentials. It was installed 28,000 times in 35 hours and executed another Monero crypto mining. You also had, so this was interesting, so this was in Go. And what happened, someone deleted their account, fine. Someone else quickly was like, okay, let me take the same name, Go bind data, and then have the same open source packages. But if someone deletes an account, should someone else be able to easily populate it? Because you might put in, intentionally vulnerable stuff, have like sneaky backdoors, etc. Like, oh, I want to know your environmental variables, etc. And then this kind of happens. So number 9, backdoored NPM. What happened is someone in NPM, it was a cookie parsing library, and they published in March 18 to introduce unauthorized publishing of mail parser. And even though they were deprecated, they were getting 64,000 weekly downloads. Even though it was known they were bad, don't go here, you're going to get backdoored. And this happened in number 10, backdoored PyPy as well. So this is an SSH decorator. I had to triple check before this talk, SSH. I was like, security shell. So this is people that care about security. I always find those the most ironic when people affect cryptographic libraries, because I'm like, okay, I care about security, so I'm going to use this vulnerable library that I'm going to get hacked with. And then, I don't know, this was more recent, so August 18, there was a homebrew breach. So especially people that do not like to use the UI, homebrew is a great way of getting things installed. So someone, I'm going to say a white hat, someone who is nice, managed to gain commit access to Homebrew in 30 minutes using an exposed GitHub API. So he had no malicious intent, so it was fine, but he could have easily done something that is downloaded 500,000 times a month. Okay, I'm so glad I'm over that slide. This is the first time presenting it. It's very busy anyway. I'm moving on. So let's look at some real-life examples. Bouncy Castle. So that's actually a cryptographic Java library. As I said, ironic, because people that care about Bouncy Castle are people that care about security. So 2007, there was a vulnerability discovered, and it had a score of 10.0. And it's a funny joke with me and my colleagues. When we find a 10.0, we take a photo, and we're like, guys, I found a perfect 10. Because they don't come along that often. It's quite hard to score 10.0. 2016, 9 years later, so the vulnerability has been around all that time, there were 23 million downloads, of which 11 million were vulnerable. So nearly 50% of all the downloads of this cryptographic library were vulnerable. Similarly, Commons collection. So this is great for deserialization. 24 million downloads in 2016. 18 million, 78%, so just over 3 in 4, were vulnerable. And ironic about this, there are 35 versions. Only 7 are vulnerable. So that's 20% of the numbers of version, makes up nearly 80% of the downloads, because, like I said, really popular. I don't know if you recognize in the background, so this is a picture of the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. And I know we've been talking, vaguely about, okay, credit card details and backdooring and typo squatting and, techie stuff. So what happened to Hollywood Hospital? They got hacked. And the issue is when you start hacking a hospital and blocking them out of all their systems, what happens to the patients that need surgery? Or what happens to people that are coming in that then have to be diverted 3 hours to the next hospital? So it becomes an issue of moving from, money and our laptops to literally life and death. And there's also the thing, Internet of Things. Internet of Things, you've got your pacemaker. It's a great idea to have Wi-Fi to go to the hospital if you get, if you've got a heart attack. But what happens if the doctors or the people making these applications aren't thinking, okay, is my Wi-Fi secure? Could I hack people's pacemakers and literally make them stop? So all of a sudden, as I said, it's becoming more of a human element and kind of almost life and death. So, recent outbreak. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. CVE 2016 1000031. So, on the 5th of November, Apache said, hey guys, we're really sorry. If you're using version 2336 and prior, you are vulnerable to a remote code execution attack. The thing is with struts, like I said, they're the good guys. They realize they've got a problem and then they publish it. What was different about this is it wasn't in the struts, it was in one of their transitive dependencies. So actually, it was within Commons file upload. So if you've seen the announcement, it tells you you need to update this dependency. Or obviously, if you upgrade struts, it's using the more recent version. The thing about it is, so I had a look at some of the references. So you can see number 2, NVD. Took a screenshot. This has actually been out since 2016. So if you are using Commons file upload, yeah, you've got a remote code execution. But surely, if you're using struts and it's pulling in Commons file uploads, then shouldn't you know what transitive dependencies you're using and be able to check to see if they're vulnerable and not use them if they're vulnerable? And the slight issue with this is security by press release can be detrimental. Because if all of a sudden you're just following the latest, oh, there's a new outbreak in Struts, oh, but it's from 2016, it can actually take away a lot of time and energy for the more, recent and pressing things. So why don't we just, have security as important, as it comes. Let's just be safe, but maybe, I don't know, I'm naive. So going back to Struts and what happened to Equifax. So this is like another version of the timeline from the first bit of my slide. So March 17, Struts vulnerability was announced. You'd expect, okay, there's a problem. You'd expect, okay, there was a bit of a dip. But then it kind of goes back up, okay, this is when Equifax discovered there was a problem. Yeah, the breach disclosed. It's statistical noise. It's averaging 80,000 vulnerable Struts downloads a month. And you can see 12 months since the Equifax breach, okay, it goes up and down by maybe like 10, 15%. But when there are vulnerabilities published, this isn't affecting behavior. Because otherwise, if someone said, say, for example, back in the 90s, mad cow disease, everyone stopped eating beef. Imagine if it was like that with kind of software. It's like, oh, this is a vulnerable component. Let's, let's change. Let's remediate. But, this graph shows, it's not, the behavior is not affected. So this was some research done by Gartner and IBM. And they said in 2006, you had about 45 average days to exploit. So you've got a while, like, hey, there's a vulnerability. In that case, Equifax would have been nearly safe. They took more like, 2.5 months, or whatever. But you see that number gradually dropping over time because there are new attack vectors. There's literally a Google search you can do to see if people are using Struts. It's like file action, do something, ask me later, I'll find it. But it's actually terrifying how easy it is. And especially with these hackers, they can just, set up scripts to just, mine the internet. Who's using Struts? Let's see if we can remote code execute. So what you're ending up with, so Equifax, all of a sudden 3. So how can you remediate? How can you, be safe? If you've only got 3 days to do it, manual processes really don't work. You need to have some way of automating, at least know what open source components you are using. So Gene Kim, the Phoenix Project, some of you may have known his book, and what he said, you have to emphasize performance of the entire system and never pass a defect downstream. Easier said than done, but it's so true. So our CEO, he likes to talk about tributaries, rivers and reservoirs. And what he says, if you're going to have polluted rivers, you're going to end up with a polluted reservoir. And it's the same thing. If you realize that you're developing and you're using a bad component, are you going to just leave it in and let it slide into production? Or why don't you just fix it there and not just, pass the problems? So what happens when you do reduce your downstream defects? So if we look back at our manufacturing, software manufacturing, so warehouses, manufacturers, finished goods, once you start managing your software supply chain, so doing security checks, seeing what you're using, looking at transitive dependencies, looking at vulnerabilities, remediating, the simple stuff. When you look versus unmanaged versus managed, there was a 48% improvement in application quality. And also, speaking to organizations, the rewards are impressive. So there was an investment bank, and they saw a 90% improvement in time to deploy because, all of a sudden, there aren't any manual bottlenecks. There's no more waiting, 6 weeks to literally enter an IP address. What you're seeing is just quicker, easier, faster. And they reduced it from 25 days to 2.5 days. I still ask myself what they're doing for 2.5 days, but that's a different question. Similarly, 34,000 hours saved in 90 days. This was a credit card company, and you know the normal process. Hi, I'm a developer. I'd like to use a component. Hi, I research components. Let me put it in the list. Let me look through. 3 weeks later, yes, you can use that component. By which point, I have either, written my own code, or, obviously not me, but I put it on a USB drive, named it Stefania Good, and got it in my application somehow. But all of a sudden, if you start automating, realizing what you're doing, eliminating manual processes, 34,000 hours saved in 90 days, which I haven't actually, I always mean to work out what is that in relation to someone's working career, but you know, a large proportion. And like I said, 48% increase in application quality. So, 3 takeaways. What can you do? Have a software bill of material for each application so you know what open source software you are using. I know this sounds simple, but if you were going to say, okay, especially JavaScript, the nested node modules. It's like, do you know every single open source component within your application? You know, how many depths of dependencies have you got, etc. Number 2, shift left. Empower developers by giving them information into their IDEs and source control. There are statistics out there. Some people say 100, for every 100 developers, there's 1 security expert. I've heard different people say it's more like 300 to 1. So why don't we use that resource? Why don't we empower developers? Developers are much happier when they're like, oh, that's bad, let me put in a good version, and then it moves away, rather than let me just develop, and then 3 weeks later, oh yeah, please change that, there's a cross-site scripting, or remote code execution, or file traversal, and I'm like, context switching. Not speaking from personal experience or anything, but... And number 3, I think most importantly, add checks at every stage to ensure you don't pass defects downstream. Because, for example, depending on your release cycles, between when you develop to when you build to when you deploy, maybe it's a day, maybe it's a week, maybe it's 6 months, but vulnerabilities come out every day. So it's important to check that there aren't new vulnerabilities coming out. So I'm Stefania Chaplin, Solutions Engineer. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you want my slides, you can email me. You can probably get them from OWASP. I think I'm being filmed. And if you want, find me on Twitter, or just find me afterwards, and you can ask me questions. And that's the end.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stefania. I've just checked on Slido to see if anyone asked the question from their mobile phone. It was 0. I think they were so fascinated with your talk.
Yeah,
So I think I'm going to ask the audience now. Yep, there's a question in the back.
What is the definition of quality for an open source software or project?
So, good question. It's a bit of a, I'm going to give the true architect answer. It depends. So it's a series of prioritization, because it can mean a lot of things. So for one, if I was going to do it, is it vulnerable? That would be, okay, tick, it's not vulnerable. Then I would look, well, in tandem, I'd look at licenses. Then you might start to look at, for example, is it a popular version? Because normally if it is a popular version, it's going to have, lots of Stack Overflow entries because people are going to be asking about it. And if something is used, there's normally user documentation. And then you can also look at age as well, because there's a lot of research. I don't have it in this deck, but I do have a great chart where it's like time. No, one side is time and one side is vulnerability. And basically, the older a component gets, the more likely it is to be vulnerable. So it's not just vulnerabilities. There is actually a whole, once you start looking at architecture as well. But like I say, prioritize. Let's just make things safe first, and then you can look at the other things.
Any more questions?
Thanks. Thanks for the talk, fascinating. In terms of identifying dependencies and doing that dynamically as part of a CI process, I think we're making progress in that respect. The 2 questions, or let's call them pushbacks, we get from the development teams generally are, but we're not using it, or there's a dependency there, but we're not using it within our flow, but how do we know whether it's going to break something, right?
Yeah.
So, in regards to the second question, so from your experience, is there a way of actually analysing whether this is what sort of impact it's going to have sort of downstream sort of thing? So if I change this, if I change, a version of Angular, for example, if I go from 1 to 2, the kind of impact ramification it's going to have within your project code base and so on. How do you handle that type of challenge?
So there's kind of a couple of things. I go for the first section first. So developers agreed. They'll be like, no, I'm not using it. I'm fine. It's fine. And the thing is, what's important, okay, so say, for example, Commons Collection. That was the hospital example. You are only vulnerable if you are if you are doing deserialization. So that's, that's also, I haven't really talked about this point. It's important to know these attacks, these vulnerabilities, exactly what or how they affect. Because, for example, I think it's Jackson data bind. It's only vulnerable if default typing is enabled. So a lot of these vulnerabilities, you can actually almost prevent them just by, in understanding what they are and how they affect them and do them that way. And that might be what developers say. It's like, oh, no, it's fine. I'm not doing deserialization. And maybe they've done their research or maybe they're blagging it. But it's important, obviously, for you to know, to have the information, what is the easiest remediation? Because it's great me saying, yeah, upgrade. But sometimes that isn't possible. Sometimes there's red tape. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it'll affect your business logic. So I think the key thing is understanding, obviously, what code you're using, all the transitives, and then exactly what these vulnerabilities are, so then you can do kind of action plans. Okay, do we need to update from Angular 1 to Angular 2? Or actually, if we remove this class, which we're not actually using, then it won't be within the attack path. Or actually, this one about file traversal, we're vulnerable anyway, so should we be finding maybe another logging tool or something like that?
That's a very good point. The point I'm trying to make is like to actually spot them. Thank you. To actually finding them is not so much of an issue, but in the context of in a CI pipeline, before we even get to deployment or delivery, actually making that type of decision making takes time, right? So it has hence the dilemma, right? Because I mean, identifying them, spotting them, kind of like building a list of vulnerabilities, running that kind of check through Sonatai, for dependency check or whatever, is not that hard, right? But actually sitting down when you got it, listen, go, shit, how do I actually decide whether this is something that, affects my flow? That's the sort of stuff that takes time. And that's the dilemma that we all kind of, have to deal with.
I like that you said my company name because I'm not allowed to. But no, that's exactly, it's all about prioritization. You're going to have, there might be a lot of vulnerabilities. Focus on I was in a bank recently, and I was in a meeting, literally had just shown them some tools, and there was immediately a CVSS 10 JavaScript. And then they had the head of development there. I'm like, oh, do we know what team's using that? And then it was some team, and they're like, okay, let's fix that today. This is a great action point. So just start from the top. The reality is the CVSS2s, maybe leave them till later. I say this, but Heartbleed was only a 5. But I think it's about, looking at the most vulnerable, and then for each, taking them individually, look at the 10s. There aren't as many 10s, thankfully. And then do behavior based on that. So obviously there are going to be a lot of things, that do need to be addressed, but just doing the prioritization and having the moral thought that you are working through the list. And I think once you can present developers with developer-friendly information, not just NBD, but exactly what class is using, if they need to change the interceptor path. Having this remediation information will, get a lot of credibility, and then they will want to be doing these things. And and you can come talk to me later. I've got one of my colleagues in the crowd.
Hi, Gatien, working for RedScan. Talking about Stack Overflow entries, how many entries do you think are actually malicious code made on purpose? And on Stack Overflow? And from your experience, could you, I don't know if we have a solution to know, if there is malicious code, how do we find it, and how do we know we've used it?
So what I have found from looking at hacks, Stack Overflow isn't the primary source. I don't know if I personally haven't done it in detail, but when I find hacks, they're normally on literally hacker sites, or there's a pre-baked Metasploit. I think what you're asking maybe on Stack Overflow, if there's something really within the help guidelines, there might be malicious in there. I think that's a kind of much smaller piece of the pie, because I don't know, maybe I'm just young and naive and hopeful because I was a developer. Stack Overflow is obviously about helping people. And okay, there could be bad people in there pointing you to malicious software, but I don't think that's the highest priority. I can probably go into my cookie history and find all the sources of work, cross-site scripting. There's literally URLs, because sometimes cross-site scripting is fun. And I think it's those kind of sites you need to prioritize. In general, Stack Overflow is just about helping people solve problems. It's not, in my experience, I haven't seen it as a main source for malicious code yet. But I'll let you know if it changes, but I don't know.
Any more questions? Yep.
Hi, really like the talk. Do you think that companies like MVM or NPM or Maven, all these dependency management platforms, do you think it's their responsibility to start improving security by either warning when developers, for example, NPM audit is really great, but other platforms don't have this. Do you think that's a way forward as well? For example, like the PyPy packages, all these kind of things.
I think security is everyone's responsibility. So it's the developers, it's the security professionals. In terms of with the public repository, yes, NPM audit, there's that functionality. I know within Maven Central you have OSS index. So I think, like I said, it's everyone's responsibility and everyone needs to do their bit. I'm not going to say it's only the public repository, but I think, yeah, I think everyone just needs to be aware of, the software they're hosting. I don't suddenly think that, Maven or NPM should just delete all the vulnerable software because, but I think, like I said, I think it's just everyone's responsibility to, be aware of and help to remediate security vulnerabilities.
Okay, one more question.
Very good talk, thank you. Actually, adding to what you said about the Stack Overflow and the malicious code, I think the problem is that we have vulnerable code. And people are grabbing it, and the threat actors know it and exploit it. I can give you guys one example we had in our university. So we had an assignment, and one of my colleagues has given this assignment in another university in Greece. So someone posted the solution online, and our students got it. So we had two problems. One was plagiarism. A lot of people plagiarized, copy-pasted, and we had to go through the formal process of doing something about them. The other problem, the bigger one, was that the person that posted originally the assignment, the solution, it was wrong. So the problem, I think, is also that we have bad code in Stack Overflow sometimes, or bad code, with security related, I mean. Yeah. And this is a major issue. I wouldn't say that we have malicious code so much. As you said, I totally agree.
Yeah. So I think this is a slight sidestep, and I'm going to tell a story from me as a teenager. But most importantly, humans are going to be humans. Sometimes it's easier to, cheat. I remember when I was doing French GCSE, and I would go on Google Translate and write in the English and get the French. But I would then translate it the way back to check, did my translation work? And I think it's the same with Stack Overflow. Yeah, it's great to copy and paste, but check what you're copying and pasting is credible and does what you actually want to do. Because if you're just copying and pasting, it's a bit like, me sending just the Google Translate, which a lot of my friends did, and they got caught, and I never did. So Stack Overflow is obviously a great source, but like all great free sources, there are going to be, individual bad actors, but also you just have to, I'm not going to say it's not credible, but it's like, you've got to obviously check what you're copying and pasting is what you want it to be and if it makes sense.
Excellent. Any more questions? Yeah, one more from Lauren.
Thank you. It strikes me that it's a bit like a minefield at the moment where it's really easy to get caught. And what we're doing with like shift left is we're auditing at the earlier, but the mines are still there. So do you ever envisage a point where we'll actually delete these vulnerable libraries or move them into different repositories, like insecure repositories, so that new people can't download them again?
I was going to say, so in like my perfect world of like rainbows and unicorns and leprechauns and pots of gold, that would be amazing. But the reality is that there are lots of organizations out there, maybe if I started a startup today, I would use only safe versions and manually, put everything bad in one place. But I think with the technical ecosystem that we're faced with, where, companies that are 40, 50 years old, they started, developing software and everyone's kind of just doing their own bit and it's ended up being this, messy flow and people are, it's a bit like the example I had about LeftPad. 12 lines of code gone, and 70,000 builds in the world just fail immediately. So although I kind of am like, that would be awesome, I think we are a very long way from it. I think once you see the download trends, going to, 0.0000001%, which is still probably millions of downloads, then we could work towards it. But then I think, for example, with public repositories, NPM audit, at least it tells you. So I think, as I said, it's every individual person's responsibility to stop doing this. And then maybe one day, as the least, the vulnerable ones are, named and shamed and and not popular, then we can work towards it. But I think what will happen, especially with transitive dependencies, people don't really update or check their transitive dependencies. So Bouncy Castle, which was my red slide with the 23 million, 11 million, that's in so many transitive and so many other applications that I think unfortunately, I think it would be a long time before we are there.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, Stefania, for the awesome talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to break for 10 minutes, so please grab more food and drink and talk to each other and come back in 10 minutes for another talk. Okay, everyone, we are ready to continue. Can you please get back to your seats? We're ready for the second talk and find out about new tracking methods that you never heard of before. Yeah, you're starting soon. Okay, everyone, can you please get back to your seats? Second talk is starting in 1 minute. Okay, everyone, can you please get back to your seats? We're getting ready to the second talk, and I'm very pleased about our second speaker because, as you know, most presenters that we had, they either come from the commercial sector or they independent security researchers or hackers. But tonight we have someone from academia, from Bournemouth University Cybersecurity Department. And of course, what we're really missing is a proper academic research. So we'll go back to university and find out from Dr. Alexis Melonas about all the new user tracking mechanisms. There you go.
Okay, so good afternoon, guys. I'm Alex, and as Sam said, we are going to discuss today about tracking. Some words about me and Stefano. So I'm with Bournemouth University. I'm a lecturer there, and I'm actually leading the Forensic Computing and Security undergraduate degree. I have a PhD in cybersecurity from AUEB. This is the Athens University of Economics and Business. I'm also a student of Fred Piper. I had my MSc from Royal Holloway. And in the past, I worked as a security consultant for a PKI vendor. I was very happy to supervise Stefano while he was doing his MSc in software engineering and internet architecture. Stefano is the technical lead in BBC, so he's managing the team that is preparing the front end for BBC in multiple languages. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us today. He's off sick, as I know. Stefano, if you see us from YouTube, hello. Hope to see you soon. Now, I don't think that I need to convince you that the web has changed our lives, unless you lived in a cave for the last couple of years. Access to information happens on the web. We do business on the web, entertainment. Unfortunately, also social interaction now mostly happens over the web. And based on recent statistics, we spend at least 1 day per week online. And well, this is actually not new. This is the case for the past 5 years. And also, the past 5 years, mobile devices are the main device that we use to access the web. And when I'm talking about mobile devices, I'm not talking about mobile phones. I'm talking about mobile phones, smartphones, tablets, devices like that. This is nice, okay, spending a whole day per week online, But as you can imagine, while we are online, we are exposed to a number of threats, such as malware, phishing, malicious advertisements, tracking, watering hole attacks, and exploitation kits that are created specifically for browsers like BIF. And the past few years, I have been curious to see whether the protection that we are getting from the client, whether it can actually help us defend against these threats. And this is a summary of my journey so far in web security. In 2013, we found that most of the security controls that you like and that you use in your desktop browser are totally absent from your mobile phone browser, from your mobile browser. So if you're considering technology like safe browsing, which is the blacklist that we are using to filter out phishing and malware, this was not there back then. Or DNT, do not track me. Blocking third-party cookies, private browsing, these were not there, okay? And at that time, still, this device, Android, iOS, your tablet, your smartphone, was the device that we were using, you were using in order to access the web, and you were totally unprotected. Or you might be protected, but you would never be able to configure it properly. It could be off by default, or it could be very confusing to find out how to enable it. In 2014, we figured out that gradually the browsers the mobile browsers started to use safe browsing, but still, by testing them against active malware and phishing, we saw that the protection was ineffective. Basically, we found many instances where the blacklist would not just sync. And this was the case 2 years ago. And actually, this June, this is a discussion for maybe another talk. And I'm also building a solution for blacklist. Going forward, private browsing. Hopefully you know that private browsing is not so private. There are some web artifacts that we can recover, even if we don't have the technical skills of digital forensic investigator. This is actually confirmed by another team in the States from Georgia Tech, and they have also proposed a solution for that. It's called ucognito. Please do not it's different from incognito, which is the private mode for Chrome. And coming to today, last year, around this time, November, we figured out that we are being tracked with some technologies that we thought that they were not used for tracking, even though they were available to us, or to you as developers, because I'm not a developer, for at least 10 years with HTML5. These technologies, excuse me. By the way, before, let me give you some context. We know that, hopefully we all know that web tracking is not new, okay? This article is at least 7 years old, but we all know that we live in the post-Snowden era. We are actively being tracked. This is actually me opening the browser for 5 minutes on a new one, actually. It's a clean browser. I tried to book for me to stay today. Here, I checked the news for my favorite team, and these were 152 sites that connected with me when I tried to actually connect to just 3 or 4 of them. This is very nice add-on from Mozilla. It's called Lightbeam. And going back to tracking, okay, tracking is not new, and it's not by definition malicious. So you can have tracking for legitimate purposes like presenting personalized content or for site analytics, but this is not the case that we are going to discuss from now on. Okay, traditionally tracking started with cookies, and then we moved on to other technologies because of space reasons. We didn't have enough space to store data with cookies, only 4 kilobytes. Also, the life expectancy of a cookie is small compared to Flash cookies or other plugins that you can use to store data on the client. But today, you don't need to install plugins to store data in clients. You can use HTML5, web storage, web SQL, IndexedDB. And while these technologies seem obvious that they can be used for tracking, for a long time, we thought that they were not. When we started this work with Stefano, we could not find any technical report, any resource online, any paper saying web storage or web SQL is actively used by trackers today. So even though the specification said that it could be, so these technologies should be treated like cookies. You should erase this data simultaneously, okay, in order to protect the privacy of us, of users. So we said, okay, let's try to figure out whether this is true or not. Let's figure out whether these 3 technologies are being used by trackers. And this is exactly what we did. To do that, we needed a representative data set of websites, and we used a HTTP archive for that. HTTP archive is crawling. It's a project that is crawling the top 1 million, roughly one. It's loosely based on Alexa, the top 1 million sites. When we used it, we got around 500,000 websites, and you can get all the content, the JavaScript, and the client-side scripts in general. And in May 2018, we were able to collect roughly 16 million of JavaScript code, different sub-resources, okay? Obviously, because the amount of the data that we had to handle was big, okay, enormous, we used Google BigQuery, and then we did static analysis to see whether the sub-resources that we have collected used the technologies in scope, one, and secondly, whether these technologies were used for tracking. To figure out this last information, we used known domains used for tracking. Disconnect Me, NoTrack, and EasyList. Okay, probably if you are using an add-on like AdBlock Plus, you have seen them, or even better, if you are using Firefox, you might know that by now Mozilla has decided to make the users opt out for anti-tracking. So now in the current version of Firefox, anti-tracking is enabled by default. And I think you have the disconnect tracking list protecting you. Right, the results now. So we found out that 3 out of 4 times the sub-resources that we collected would include code from web storage, using web storage, that was writing or reading to your client. And most of the times, you can also see that this is from a third-party sub-resource. So it was not from the actual website, let's say, that hosted the code. This, I'm assuming that this is not very surprising to you, especially if you are a web developer. But what is very interesting is that we have actual proof that tracking is now the main case. Okay, so 70% of the times that we found web storage in our data set, this code was used for tracking. And this was the case even for Web SQL, which if you are a web developer, you would know that it's deprecated, it's not used anymore. This is also highlighted in our numbers that we found. But still, this technology was used half of the time for tracking. And if we start thinking about ever cookies, this can, excuse me, this highlight the impact of our findings. Right. We also found that in most of the websites that we collected that were in the data set, at least one tracking sub-resource was found. This was the case for web storage, and the other two technologies were not so frequently used. So the next question that we wanted to answer was, okay, so these three technologies are being actively used for tracking. What is the client doing about that? You might remember that the specification said, okay, please treat these technologies like cookies and get rid of them, basically. To see what the browsers were doing, we examined the most popular browsers for desktop and mobile devices, Windows and Mac for desktops, desktop and Android, iOS, and Windows Phone for the mobile browsers. To do that, Stefano created a web app that would test the compatibility of the browser with these three technologies and would also write and read data on your client, so we could check whether we could write and then delete and then read again the same data. This is available on GitHub. I highly encourage you to see whether your browser erases this data from your client, from your device. Now, one of the results that we found, unfortunately, was that if you are using the control that your browser has to erase this data, clearing browsing data or something like that, according to the client that you are using, this is not enough. Because one, all the three different technologies will not be erased in some cases, or you need an extra step in order to delete all of them. And we know that for naive users, meaning users that are not technically or security savvy, even one extra step in the GUI is enough to make them fail. In this table, you can see a summary of the browsers and the issues that we found. So for instance, for Android and Firefox version 60, you can try to erase the data, but data from IndexedDB would stay, okay? The browser says, okay, they have been erased, but the tracker wins, basically. Instances where data deletion needs an extra step in the GUI, for example, in Windows 10, Firefox 56, again, you need to add, to show a hidden menu before you select IndexedDB so it can be erased. Now, private session. We know that private session is not so private. We also found that data from these technologies would stay in your device when you close the private session. And in another case, we found that data from a private session would be available to a non-private session. For the latter case, the only browser that we found that was this one. And I'm assuming that unless you are from Asia or you are frequently going to Asia and you or you have friends in Asia, you would not have seen this browser, but this is a very popular browser in Asia. Another example for data that persists after closing the private session, for instance, in Opera 46.3, essentially the data stay. Nothing happens when you close the private session. And also, we also had an instance with the guest mode of Chrome. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Alex, you are talking about private sessions. Guest mode is not exactly private mode, private session, but actually, if you are using guest mode in Chrome, the browser would say something, you can browse the web now on guest mode, nothing will stay in your browser, you cannot be tracked, okay? And this is also, again, not the case. Chrome 62 for macOS or Windows, all the data remain. The only way to delete the data is to actually close the whole window of the browser. Closing the guest mode window will not kill the data. Right, so as we have discussed, we have a number of vulnerabilities that we found in the browsers, and we notified the vendors. We are happy that most of the vulnerabilities have been patched, or the vendors tried to patch them, okay? This is good, but at the same time, it's bad, because we know that many users do not update their phones. For example, if you have an iOS device, and we know that the vendors sometimes introduce updates that make old phones slow, you might decide, like myself actually, I have an old iPad that I'm not updating. I'm not getting the updates, so I'm vulnerable to tracking with these technologies. And we also have devices, first of all, that cannot update. So your smart TV might not update. Your old device, which is a Samsung, might not update because the vendor will not give you the update. And also, the second point is that we found instances that by patching the vulnerability, another vulnerability happened, or we found that different versions of the same browser would have the bug, fix it, have it again, having a different one. So it means that there is a problem in the process, as the previous talk was saying. Yeah, so let's have a demo with this. And I need water. And you can hear me drinking water, sorry for that. Right, so these are some tests that I made yesterday. I highly encourage you to use Storage Watcher and see whether your browser is vulnerable or not. Let's start with Opera. So if you remember, because I don't, Opera had an issue with the private mode. So if you close the private session, the GUI, the data will remain. And this was Opera 46.3. Bear with me for a moment. This should work. And let me see first what is the version is 48, I can't remember. 48.2, so it's a newer version. Let's try first the data deletion. So I'm now going to Storage Watcher. It's a very simple GUI. You add data from these three primitives for client-side storage, and then you can see whether you can read them, essentially. This is what I'm doing. Local storage, IndexedDB, WebSQL, the data are there. The data are just timestamps. Okay, I'm reading them. I just click if you didn't see it. On the list all entries, right? And then I'm going to the settings to erase the data. Scrolling down, clear browsing data, selecting everything. There is an advanced more options that I'm enabling now. It says data have been erased. Thank you very much. And I'm going back now to Storage Watcher. And the data are still there. Only if I saw only web storage was deleted. So if I had an ever cookie technique, I could resurrect cookies with the other two primitives. You can delete web storage, but I will resurrect it later from IndexedDB, or I can create a cookie or another technology. And this, if you have noticed, this is not a vulnerability that we found in the previous version. This is a new vulnerability that has been introduced. We have checked the previous versions. They didn't have this problem with the data deletion. They had a problem with the private session. If you have ever used if you have ever tried to create a snapshot when you are using a private session, you will see that it's blank. It's a privacy feature. And this is why I had to actually record my phone, and you will see my fingers. And the screen resolution, the image quality is not as good as the previous one. So again, I'm doing the same things, checking that everything has been erased. And then I'm opening a new private session, going to Storage Watcher, adding the data, closing the session. At some point, my secrets are safe. The data should have been deleted. Let's go back to the normal session, checking whether the data are leaked or not. They are not. We are happy for that. But when I go back to another private session, the data are there. IndexedDB and WebSQL. So the control didn't work. Now going back to Firefox. So Firefox, and the results that I had for Firefox are for version 60, and we are talking about version 63, so a newer version. Same scenario, I'm going to Storage Watcher. Well, I'm checking first the version, sorry. This is a notification that WebSQL is not supported by the browser. This is a decision by Mozilla. There is nothing there. Oh, failed to add. I haven't seen this. Okay, I have added the data. I was not careful when I was recording. Right, and now I'm going to the privacy settings. And then I'm making sure that everything will be deleted when I will exit the browser. Going back and killing the process, right? So I'm expecting that when I go back to Storage Watcher, the data will not be there. This was the pop-up that is not supported. And as you saw, the data were there, right? Okay, now, This vulnerability that I saw earlier has been patched. But the problem is there is a problem with the GUI. So if we go back to the settings, it says, I will delete them if you select quit. So basically, if you exit the browser as I did, as most people actually, this control doesn't work. Okay, the only way is to go back, go to the menu, and hit quit. Okay, which is paranoid. And when I go back to Storage Watcher, I can confirm that the data are not there anymore. List all didn't give me anything. So yes, the vulnerability was patched, but it introduced another obstacle to the users. If I didn't double check, I wouldn't realize that this control was there, but I had to do an extra step. That I think that for most users, this will not happen. Okay? I tried my best to give you all the information that we did. Actually, this is Stefano's work, so he actually knows the technical details better than I do. I'm not a web developer, and this is about web development, actually. Our work has been published to IEEE Access, and I'm sharing the material with you. The paper is open access. If you want, you can also have the paper. All the details are there. We have all the different tests that we made. You can also check that the versions, if you have a previous, if you have a device with an outdated version of your operating system, you can check there our results, or you can directly go to Storage Watcher and do it yourselves. So that's it from me. You can send me, you can actually contact us via email, and I'm happy to take questions now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malas. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating because we all are sort of privacy conscious people, and we open new private tabs, we clear cookies, clear private data. It looks like, yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because, and how many, I wonder how many marketers know about dirty tricks of using IndexedDB and local storage. Well, any questions about that?
They should know, because 70% of the use of these technologies is for tracking.
Is for tracking.
Especially for web storage, which is the technology for tracking. So they probably know it. We didn't know. Hopefully now we know.
Hey, so kind of your advice then is the best thing to do is we all should just use kind of Tor browser or pay for a VPN to kind of hide where we are?
It depends. A Tor browser will not save you from this stuff. It will give you anonymity. This is storing data on your browser, okay?
So you just wipe the Tor browser, sorry, afterwards, just delete it and then reinstall it.
Yes, okay. If you are using multiple browsers, yes,
This is
the
about
solution.
mobile phones, right? That's another interesting question. Yeah, so what do? Do you need to completely uninstall Chrome from your device and then reinstall it? And Chrome is one thing, but obviously there are a lot of system browsers and MIUI browser that I showed, which is the most popular browser in Asia, in China in particular, right? So they're using a lot of MIUI.
You can also try to virtualize, to have multiple browsers and use it for specific cases.
Two questions. Did you get any money from browsers?
No, I'm not doing this work for the money.
That's good. And second question, do you believe that these browsers like Opera and Firefox, they have a motivation to track users?
The browsers, well, I cannot speak on behalf of the browsers, but I know that their teams, because we are working with some of them, they are trying to do something about it. And one way forward is the anti-tracking that is, by default on for Firefox.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, I have one for you, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll come back to you. So, you know the DNT header, right?
Yes.
Do not track, which is very popular, and obviously a lot of browsers started adding it. I think very recently there was an article saying that it doesn't actually do anything. So have you done in your research any correlation of DNT flag being switched on or off in the browser? Because I know, or is it just these mobile browsers don't even have it?
Now the mobile browsers probably have it. To be honest, the last time I checked for DNT was in 2013. But to be honest, I stopped caring about DNT because I know that the advertisers are ignoring it. And this is known 5 years ago. This is not a recent thing. DNT is being ignored.
Thanks. That kind of leads me on to my question anyway. So the IAB's version for the app, do you feel that it will help regulate the tracking of personal information through
Say that
browsers?
again?
Do you feel that the IAB's app version will help regulate personal information being tracked?
Well, there has been a new initiative with the GDPR trying to fix stuff, but I'm not proficient in the legal stuff. I cannot give you a concrete answer. I think that with regards to tracking, things are moving forward. Okay, we know that the legal guys are slower because their understanding in technology is not in the same level as we have as computer scientists. But I think that things are improving. And a lot of, for example, I know that for Mozilla it's a priority tracking for the coming years. And they are doing a lot of work for that.
Yeah, that's a question.
If we wanted to help you with the testing results as a community to increase the sort of grid of combination of devices and
Please email me.
only that?
Yes, please. I need doers.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm also. This is something that we have discussed with Sam last year. I'm also leading an open source tool, but my commitments in the university doesn't allow me to do as much as I want. So this is another topic. So we have a tool which is a super blacklist, okay, for anti-tracking, anti-phishing, anti-malware, open source. Okay, if you are interested to work with us, please email me. Okay, we have stuff that we need doers. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and as you know, we discussed with Dr. Milonis because the good way of approaching this is actually to start an OWASP project.
Yes.
And obviously, for the OWASP project to be successful, it needs contributors, right? So we're looking at you is able to contribute. Again, you don't have to be a developer to contribute. You can be a tester. You can be a documentation writer. You can be a proofreader. You can be a marketer and promoter, but help the project in any way you can.
Now, with the introduction of GDPR, now we are seeing that all sites are introducing their usage of cookies. But I don't know if if GDPR also consider introducing these local storage.
I don't think that well, again, I'm not the expert in the legal part, but I would be surprised if they specifically say these three technologies, especially if knowing that we didn't know that they are being used so much. Their specification, though, as I said earlier, says treat them like cookies, okay, and delete them.
And I think one of the interesting things, as Talal has mentioned in his question, I think every single website you visit these days gives you the EU GDPR warning or says, oh, this site is using cookies, and you have to click on this annoying button saying, okay, it's okay to be tracked, please use cookies. But no website is saying, oh, we use some other techniques like IndexedDB or WebSQL to store information about you and track you. Of course, they don't, right? And of course, the scary thing about these things, you cannot even control it anywhere from the browser, right? There isn't a page of settings. For cookies, you can go and say, show my cookies. You can see the list of cookies. And, a lot of organizations actually list the cookies that they use and the purpose for which they're using the cookies. But using the local storage, IndexedDB, and the WebSQL techniques. No one's listing those. And of course, the scary thing is a lot of, let's say, bad marketers who actually fingerprint the browser using other characteristics of the browser. For example, the platform, the screen resolution, the color depth. There are many other techniques how it's possible to fingerprint you, particularly as a user, right? Browsing a particular website. But they're not deterministic. They're not deterministic, right? This is 100% deterministic because any web page can write to a local storage on your disk, on your computer, on your browser, without your knowledge. You have no idea what it's writing, and it can read it back every time you visit this website, right? And it's not a cookie. You have no way of seeing or controlling it. It was created for developers, right?
Yeah.
For the convenience of developers, and yes, somehow the whole privacy element got lost. Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, this concludes tonight's evening. So basically just 2 more words to say about what we're going to do next. Right. Where's my presentation? Here.
Πολύ.
Right.
Ναι.
So.
Ναι, είδες αυτά με τα...
Yes. So first of all, I hope you enjoy the evening and you enjoy the talks. I would like to one more time to thank our speakers, Stefania Chaplin and Dr. Alex Melonas. Thank you. And many, many thanks to the hosts of these events, Microsoft Reactor and Microsoft Cloud Advocates. If you're interested, you can get a free Azure Cloud promo code, right, which is available to you if you want to try out Azure. So we will publish that on Twitter and our social media. Thank you very much for coming. Again, to make sure that you don't miss the next events, please follow us, subscribe to the mailing list, right? Join our Meetup. Follow us on LinkedIn. What we're going to do now, we're going to head to the pub. So that's the Singer Tavern, very easy address to find. Number 1 City Road, 5 minutes walk down Worship Street that way. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next year. Thank you.
Τον επόμενο χρόνο. Τον επόμενο χρόνο, είπε.
Κάθε 2 μήνες περίπου.
Οκ. Αυτά με τα...